Mr. Stevenson goes to Dallas. Dallas officialdom has groveled extravagantly about the incident of a lady accidentally bumping Adlai Stevenson with a placard. Liberals are determined to silence everyone through fear of being branded crackpot who would criticize the UN. But the people who picketed Stevenson in Dallas are not ignoramuses. The people who applauded what Stevenson said are the ones ignorant of what the UN has done to this country and of what Stevenson himself stands for. Stevenson has heavy responsibility for betrayal of American honor at the Bay of Pigs. He advocates surrender of American sovereignty, and he symbolizes the totalitarian liberalism that plunders the people for causes harmful to their country. Yet he was given worshipful treatment, and broadcasting and press facilities denied prominent and educated persons of opposite view. That is a summary of my report on Mr. Stevenson Goes to Dallas. The full report after a message from my sponsor. Sandy Buckland was an idiot. He and I worked together as itinerant farmhands for about 6 weeks one summer. I was a boy of 15 and Sandy was a man in his middle 40s. Hence, I always paid him the respect that a man was due from a boy in those backward, isolationist, non-progressive days between the two great wars. But a few of the other field hands made fun of Sandy. There was a great deal of cruelty in some of the practical jokes they played on him. It is still painful to recall the last time I saw Sandy, walking down the road with no place to go, carrying all his worldly goods in a worn and torn cardboard suitcase, crying like a child. This was the end result of the last practical joke at Sandy's expense. Sandy stood in awe of the foreman. A couple of the boys, pretending friendly concern, told him how to get on the good side of the boss. Put in a little free time now and then, doing work he wasn't told to do. That would show the boss he was interested and it would make a good impression. Sandy was willing, but he couldn't think of anything to do. The boys helped him out. Go down to the gear room next Sunday and fix up all the broken harness. That'll make a hit with the boss. Sandy went, but he couldn't find any broken harness. The boys helped him again. Break some, they advised him, so's you'll have some to fix. Sandy did. He ripped open a dozen expensive mule collars, cut up a bunch of Hames straps, and mutilated several pairs of lines, and then set to work trying to mend them. The boss caught him and fired him. Sandy packed up and left, homeless and jobless, and, as I said, crying like a child. I try to keep Sandy Buckland out of my memory. The thought of him, after more than 30 years, still puts a lump in my throat. But he comes inexorably to mind every time I hear someone like Adlai Stevenson talk about the United Nations. Mr. Stevenson says that if we did not have a UN, we would have to invent one because the UN is indispensable to world peace. Mr. Stevenson and others like him used to concentrate on Palestine when talking about peacemaking accomplishments of the UN. Every time there was an upsurge of criticism of the UN, the Councils on World Affairs, the American Association for the United Nations, and other semi-official affiliates of the Council on Foreign Relations would stage meetings throughout the nation featuring prominent personalities talking about how the UN stopped a war in Palestine and thus averted a world catastrophe. Now that is the same line of thinking that got poor old Sandy Buckland fired. There was not any harness broken to be fixed, but Sandy cut up a few pieces so that he'd have some to fix. There was not any Palestine war to stop, but UN statesmen made one when they carved the modern state of Israel out of the heart of the Arab homeland. This has given them a peacemaking job to work on perpetually. Anytime they need another UN peacemaking accomplishment, some UN official can make an expensive New York-Israeli round trip, press releases are issued, resolutions are introduced into the General Assembly, and another war is stopped by what Mr. Stevenson calls a dialogue in the United Nations. In recent months, UN spokesmen have been holding the ever-ready Palestine problem in reserve for needy times. Nowadays, they talk about the UN peacemaking accomplishments in the Belgian Congo. That's what Mr. Stevenson stressed recently in Dallas. The Congo is another Sandy Buckland type operation. Things were going as well in the Belgian Congo as mortal men had any right to expect. UN pressures forced the Belgians to get out and leave the country in the hands of people not yet qualified to govern themselves. The resulting bloody mess will give UN peacemakers something to meddle in until the last American dollar is squandered. The UN officials said they wanted self-determination in the Congo, but when pro-Western Katanga tried to preserve law and order by asserting self-determination, UN peacemakers ravaged the country with bestial violence. When the UN creates a problem, it does not want anyone else solving it. If folks are permitted to solve problems which the UN creates for them, there might not be enough unsolved problems for UN officials to intervene in and have dialogues about. Now, Sandy Buckland would understand that, all except the dialogue part. When people with differing views talked about something, Sandy used to say they were arguing. Mr. Stevenson says they're having a dialogue. But that's a minor point that Sandy could get around or live with. As I said, I don't like to think about Sandy Buckland, but he has been much on my mind since Mr. Stevenson came to Dallas. I wish I knew where Sandy is. The United Nations could use him. On October 23rd, the United States Day Committee held a meeting in the Dallas Memorial Auditorium Theater. Edwin A. Walker spoke, criticizing the United Nations, advocating restoration of a free and independent American republic. None of the news reporting media gave the meeting advance publicity. By word of mouth and distribution of handbills, the committee reached enough people to get an audience of about 1,200. The meeting was not broadcast. Press coverage was perfunctory. The next night, Adlai Stevenson made a United Nations Day speech in the same place, to an audience of about 1,700. His visit was given an enormous amount of advance publicity by news reporting media. His speech was televised live at prime early evening time, free. Not all of the 1,700 people who went to hear Mr. Stevenson were jubilant about him and his message. Inside the theater, there were people who have a dim view of Mr. Stevenson and the United Nations. Outside, a crowd of such people had gathered carrying placards to let Mr. Stevenson know their sentiments. There was also a crowd of pro-Stevenson pickets outside, jeering and insulting the anti-Stevenson people. While under police escort from the meeting hall to his car, Stevenson suddenly turned and strode toward the picketing group, saying, "Let's see what's wrong with these people." He walked directly toward a lady carrying an anti-Stevenson placard. Someone in the crowd yelled, "Put down the signs." The lady obediently lowered hers just in time to bump Mr. Stevenson on the head. 4 days later, the affair was still making banner headlines on the front pages of both Dallas newspapers, and the civic leaders of Dallas were still groveling extravagantly. They had sent wires of apology to Mr. Stevenson and to President Kennedy. The city council was deliberating the solemn question of sending formal official apologies. Mayor Earl Cabell had made several pronouncements about the extremists who had done this thing, saying they were the same group of radicals who had voted in the last election to reject the mayor's proposed public housing. Cabell even hinted darkly that there ought to be a law against people who dislike public housing in the United Nations. In short, the liberals of Dallas were determined to make such clamor that the fear of being branded hate-mongers and crackpots would forever silence all who would criticize the United Nations or any other cause or institution that is a sacred cow of liberalism. By doing this, our liberal leaders are compounding the grievance which caused the demonstration against Stevenson in the first place. The people who picketed Stevenson were not wild-eyed ignoramuses. The ignoramuses were inside applauding what Stevenson said. I say this in kindness. I am too kind to believe that there are more than 100 people in Dallas, Texas, who would applaud Adlai Stevenson if they were not ignorant of what the man has done, what he proposes to do, what he symbolizes. Adlai Stevenson has heavy responsibility for the betrayal of American honor and of American security interests at the Bay of Pigs tragedy. He advocates surrender of American sovereignty to the United Nations. He boasts about the UN Congo operation, which was financed with money confiscated from American wage earners, and which brings a feeling of hot shame to every American patriot who knows the truth about what the UN did with our money in the Congo. Stevenson is a foremost symbol of the totalitarian liberalism which plunders the American people of the fruits of their own labor for causes and programs harmful to their republic. With it all, he has built a reputation as a wit by making fun of well-informed Americans who know what he is and what he stands for. Most of the people who picketed Stevenson know the truth about the man. They resented his speech and the fact that he made it in a building erected as a memorial to Dallasites who fought and died for their country. They resented the worshipful treatment given him by civic leaders who scorn or ignore prominent persons of opposite view. They resented the fact that men like Stevenson roamed the country at taxpayers' expense to advocate policies which are ruinous to our nation. Most of all, they resented the fact that men like Stevenson are freely given all the best facilities of radio, television, and the press to express their views, while the great body of educated and reputable citizens of opposing view are denied the means of telling the truth. Excuse me. Picketing and demonstrating are poor means of expression, which I have never approved. The way to counter the harm that a man like Stevenson does is not to wave signs at him, but to reach others with facts which will expose the fallacy of his views. But how can this be done when those who have the facts are denied means of public expression even remotely comparable to the means universally and perpetually available to Stevenson and his kind? Goodbye. God bless you. For the documented text of this broadcast, send 25 cents to Dan Smoot, Dallas 14, Texas, and ask for $4.29. Mr. Stevenson Goes to Dallas. 6 copies, $1.